The dust cloud rose from the valley road like a banner of defeat, and Sarah Mitchell knew before the rider even reached her that the cattle baron had sent his answer, and it was no. She stood in front of her weathered canvas tent, watching the messenger approach her small flock of 200 sheep that grazed nervously on the parched grass. It was July the 1884 in Montana Territory, and the drought had turned the usually green valleys into brown expanses that crackled underfoot. Her father had died 6 months ago from pneumonia, leaving her at 22 years old with nothing but these sheep, a wagon, and a determination that burned hotter than the summer sun overhead. The messenger, a thin man with a tobacco-stained beard, pulled his horse to a stop and spat into the dust. "Mr. Thornton says you got 3 days to move your woolly rats off this public land. Says cattle got priority and sheep ruin the grass for proper grazing." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "This is open range. My father filed a claim on the water rights to that creek." She pointed to the thin trickle of water that ran through the property, barely enough to sustain her flock in this heat. "Thornton owns everything from the mountains to the railroad. He says different." The messenger wheeled his horse around. 3 days, miss. After that, his men will come move them sheep for you, and you will not like how they do it." She watched him ride away, her hands curling into fists at her sides. James Thornton controlled 30,000 acres and ran cattle across public lands like he owned those too. Her father had warned her about men like him, men who believed their wealth gave them dominion over everything and everyone. She had heard the stories of other sheep herders driven out, their flocks scattered or worse. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah walked among her sheep, counting them out of habit, checking for signs of illness or injury. These animals represented everything she had left of her father's legacy. He had built this flock carefully over 15 years, breeding for quality wool and hardy constitutions. She could not simply abandon them, but she also had nowhere to go. Every water source for 50 miles was either on Thornton's land or claimed by his allies. That evening, as she cooked a sparse dinner of beans and hardtack over her small fire, Sarah heard the sound of a horse approaching from the west. Her hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped against her wagon wheel. A woman alone on the frontier learned to be cautious. But the rider who emerged from the gathering dusk sat easy in his saddle, his hands visible and empty of weapons. He was tall, she could see that, even mounted, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, chaps stained with honest dirt, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. "Evening, ma'am," he called out when he was still 20 yards away. "I am not here to cause trouble, just wanted to talk, if you are willing." Sarah stood, keeping the fire between them, her rifle within reach. "Talk about what?" He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with gray eyes that held an unexpected kindness. "Name is Cole Brennan. I run a small spread about 10 miles north of here. Heard you had some trouble with Thornton." "Word travels fast," Sarah said, not relaxing her guard. Cole smiled, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his serious face. "In this territory, bad news travels faster than good. Look, Miss Mitchell, I know we have not been introduced properly, and I apologize for showing up unannounced. But I wanted you to know that Thornton does not speak for all cattlemen around here. Some of us remember when our fathers were starting out, when they needed a helping hand instead of a boot in the face." Sarah studied him carefully, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. She had learned to read men quickly in the months since her father died. Too many had offered help that came with strings attached, expectations she had no intention of meeting. But Cole Brennan's eyes were direct and honest, and he stood with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. "What exactly are you offering, Mr. Brennan?" "I have water and grass on my land, not much with this drought, but enough for your flock if we manage it right. You can graze your sheep there until the rains come, and you can move to better pasture." He paused, then added, "No charge, no expectations. Just neighbors helping neighbors." "Why would you do that?" "Thornton will not be happy if a cattleman helps a sheep herder. I have heard how he operates." Cole's expression hardened. "James Thornton has been bullying people in this territory for 10 years. Somebody needs to stand up to him eventually. Might as well be now." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. a sensation she could not quite name. Here was a stranger offering her exactly what she needed most, asking nothing in return, except perhaps the satisfaction of defying a tyrant. It seemed too good to be true, and yet everything in his manner suggested he meant exactly what he said. "I do not want to bring trouble to your door, Mr. Brennan." "Cole," he corrected gently, "and trouble has a way of finding us, whether we invite it or not. At least this way, you and your sheep will have a fighting chance." She made her decision quickly, the way her father had taught her. When offered help from an honest source, accept it with grace. "All right, Cole, I appreciate your offer, and I accept. When can I move the flock?" "Tomorrow morning, if you are ready. I will come back with a couple of my hands to help drive them. It is a decent walk, and we will want to move them in the cooler hours." He gathered his reins, preparing to mount. "Pack what you need for a few months. You can set up camp near my ranch house. I have a spare cabin that needs some work, but it has got a roof and a stove." "I can pay you," Sarah said quickly. "Not much, but I have a little money saved, and the wool will sell come autumn." Cole shook his head. "Keep your money, you will need it." He swung into the saddle with easy grace. "See you at dawn, Miss Mitchell." "Sarah," she said, surprising herself, "if I am going to be grazing my sheep on your land, you might as well call me Sarah." His smile came again, warmer this time. "Sarah it is. Sleep well. Tomorrow will be a long day." She watched him ride away into the darkness, her mind already racing with all the preparations she needed to make. For the first time in months, since her father had taken his last labored breath in a rented room in Helena, Sarah felt a spark of hope kindle in her chest. True to his word, Cole arrived the next morning, just as the sun was painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. He brought 2 men with him, both older cowboys with sun-creased faces and capable hands. They introduced themselves as Hank and Pete, and they set about helping Sarah break camp and load her wagon with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. The sheep, sensing the activity, grew restless and noisy. Sarah moved among them with her 2 dogs, border collies named Jack and Lady, that her father had trained from puppies. The dogs knew their work, circling the flock and keeping them bunched together as the humans prepared to move out. "You have good dogs," Cole observed, watching as Jack nipped expertly at the heels of a wandering ewe, turning her back to the group. "My father bred them. Said a good dog was worth 3 men when it came to handling sheep." Sarah finished tying down the canvas cover on her wagon. "They are the smartest animals I have ever known." The drive north took most of the day. The sheep moved slowly in the heat, needing frequent rests and water. Cole rode ahead to scout the route, looking for the easiest path and the shadiest rest stops. Hank and Pete flanked the flock, keeping watch for predators and strays. Sarah drove her wagon and worked with her dogs, and despite the heat and dust, she found herself enjoying the companionship after months of solitude. They stopped at midday beside a stand of cottonwood trees, where a spring bubbled up from between rocks. While the sheep drank and rested in the shade, Cole pulled food from his saddlebags and shared it around. Thick sandwiches of beef and bread that tasted like luxury after Sarah's weeks of sparse rations. "Your cook makes good sandwiches," she said, sitting on a fallen log and savoring every bite. "I make them myself," Cole replied with amusement. "I do not have a cook, cannot afford one. I run my place with just Hank, Pete, and myself most of the time. We hire extra hands during roundup and branding, but otherwise we keep it small." Sarah looked at him with new respect. "That is a lot of work for 3 men." "It is," he admitted, "but it is honest work, and the land is ours free and clear. My father came out here in '67, right after the war. He built the ranch from nothing, and when he died 5 years ago, he left it to me without a penny of debt. I figure I owe it to his memory to keep it running the same way, careful and clean." There was a quiet pride in his voice that Sarah recognized because she felt the same way about her father's legacy. "How much land do you have?" "About 2,000 acres of deeded land, and we run cattle on maybe another 3,000 of public range. Nothing like Thornton's empire, but enough to make a living if we are smart about it." He took a drink from his canteen. "What about you? How did your father end up in the sheep business?" Sarah leaned back against the rough bark of the cottonwood, watching her flock rest peacefully. "He was a farmer originally, back in Ohio. But the land gave out, and he heard there were opportunities out here. He tried cattle first, but he did not have enough capital to build a big herd. Sheep were cheaper to start with, and the wool market was good. He built the flock slowly, always putting quality over quantity. Sounds like a wise man. He was. Sarah felt the familiar ache in her chest, grief still fresh despite the months that had passed. He taught me everything he knew about raising sheep, about reading the weather and the grass, about breeding and lambing. He always said if anything happened to him, I should sell the flock and find a good husband to take care of me. But you did not, Cole observed. No, I did not. These sheep are all I have left of him, and I am not ready to give them up. Besides, she added with a touch of defiance, I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Cole held up his hands in mock surrender. I have no doubt about that. Anyone who can manage 200 sheep and stand up to James Thornton clearly does not need anyone's protection. But even as he said it, they both knew it was not entirely true. Alone, Sarah would have been driven off within days. Thornton's men would have scattered her flock and burned her camp, and there would have been nothing she could do to stop them. Cole's offer of help had quite likely saved everything she had. They reached Cole's ranch in late afternoon, and Sarah felt her breath catch at the sight of it. The property sat in a natural basin surrounded by low hills, with a clear creek running through the middle. The grass here was still brown from the drought, but there were green patches near the water, and the cottonwoods that lined the creek provided blessed shade. The ranch house itself was a solid log structure with a covered porch and real glass windows. Nearby stood a barn, a corral, and several smaller outbuildings. The cabin is over there, Cole said, pointing to a small structure set apart from the main buildings, nestled under a stand of aspens. Like I said, it needs work. The roof leaked last spring, and I have not had time to fix it properly, but it is sound enough, and it will give you more comfort than a tent. Sarah drove her wagon to the cabin, while Cole and his men helped guide the sheep to a fenced pasture near the creek. When she finally climbed down and entered the cabin, she found it was larger than she had expected. One main room with a fireplace and cook stove, a smaller bedroom to one side, and real wooden floors that just needed a good scrubbing. The roof showed signs of water damage in one corner, but overall, the structure was solid. What do you think? Cole asked from the doorway, ducking his head to enter. I think it is wonderful, Sarah said honestly. Better than anywhere I have stayed in months. There is a good well just outside, and you are welcome to use the barn for storage if you need it. My men and I take our meals together in the main house, and you are welcome to join us whenever you like. But I will understand if you prefer your privacy. Sarah appreciated his tact. Thank you. I think for now I will cook for myself, but I am grateful for the invitation. Over the next few days, Sarah settled into a routine at Cole's ranch. She rose early to check on her sheep, moving them to fresh grazing spots and inspecting them for any health problems. The heat continued relentless, but the creek provided enough water, and the grass, though sparse, was sufficient for her flock's needs. She spent her afternoons cleaning and repairing the cabin, patching the roof, and scrubbing years of dust and neglect from every surface. Cole kept a respectful distance, but Sarah noticed he found reasons to check on her progress. He brought her fresh meat from his cattle, vegetables from a struggling garden that Pete tended with grim determination, and even a rocking chair he claimed was just taking up space in his barn. Their conversations were brief but comfortable, and Sarah found herself looking forward to these casual encounters more than she wanted to admit. On the fourth day, trouble arrived. Sarah was tending her sheep in the far pasture when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. She looked up to see 5 riders cresting the hill, and her heart sank when she recognized the lead man, Thornton's foreman, a brutal man named Cutter, who was known for his skill with both fists and firearms. Cole appeared from the direction of the barn, moving quickly but calmly. Hank and Pete materialized on either side of him, and Sarah noticed all 3 men wore their gun belts, something she had not seen before around the ranch. Cutter and his men rode right up to where Sarah stood with her sheep, deliberately scattering some of the flock. The dogs barked frantically, trying to keep order, and Sarah had to whistle them back before they got themselves kicked or shot. Well, well, Cutter said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. Heard the sheep girl found herself a protector. Did not figure you for a sheep lover, Brennan. Cole moved to stand beside Sarah, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard. What I am is a man who helps his neighbors, something you and Thornton might try sometime. Mr. Thornton sent me to deliver a message, Cutter said, ignoring Cole's comment. He says any man who harbors sheep on his land is no better than a sheep herder himself. He says this is your one warning to send the girl and her animals packing. You can tell Thornton that I make my own decisions about what happens on my land, Cole replied evenly. And right now, I have decided that Sarah and her sheep are welcome here for as long as they need to stay. Cutter's expression hardened. You are making a mistake, Brennan. Thornton has ways of dealing with people who do not cooperate. Is that a threat? Cole's voice remained calm, but Sarah heard the steel beneath it. It is a statement of fact. Cutter looked at Sarah with open contempt. Girl, you would be smart to move on. Men have a habit of losing interest when the cost gets too high. Before Sarah could respond, Cole stepped forward. The movement was small, but suddenly the atmosphere changed, crackling with tension. You have delivered your message, Cutter. Now get off my land. For a moment, Sarah thought Cutter might push it further. His hand moved toward his gun, and his men shifted in their saddles. But then Hank and Pete moved too, not reaching for their weapons, but positioning themselves with the casual expertise of men who had been in tight situations before. Cutter was outnumbered in terms of skill, if not numbers, and he knew it. This is not over, Cutter said, but he was already wheeling his horse around. Thornton always gets what he wants. Always. They watched the 5 riders depart, nobody moving until they were well out of sight. Then Cole turned to Sarah, his expression concerned. Are you all right? Sarah realized she was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. I am fine. I just hate that I brought this to your door. You did not bring anything I did not invite, Cole said firmly. Come on, let us get these sheep settled and then have some coffee. You look like you could use it. In the kitchen of the main ranch house, Sarah sat at the worn wooden table while Cole made coffee on the big iron stove. Hank and Pete had gone back to their work, checking the cattle and making sure Cutter's men had truly left the property. The house surprised Sarah with its tidiness, clearly the work of men who had learned to take care of themselves. I am sorry about that, Cole said, setting a cup of coffee in front of her. I knew Thornton would make some kind of move, but I hoped he would at least wait a few days. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting the heat steady her. You can still change your mind. I would understand. Thornton is a powerful man, and I am just a woman with a flock of sheep. Cole sat down across from her, his expression serious. Sarah, when I made you that offer, I knew exactly what I was doing. My father taught me that a man's word is worth more than gold, and that standing up for what is right matters more than convenience. I am not sending you away because Thornton sends his bully boys to threaten me. But he could ruin you, Sarah protested. I have heard the stories. Men who cross him lose their water rights, their access to markets, sometimes their lives. Maybe, Ian Cole admitted, but what kind of man would I be if I let fear stop me from doing the right thing? What kind of life would that be? Always backing down, always letting men like Thornton have their way. He took a drink of his coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. Besides, I have something Thornton does not. What is that? Friends, real ones, not men bought with money and fear. When word gets out about what I am doing, there will be other small ranchers who remember their own struggles, who are tired of Thornton's bullying. He is powerful, but he is not invincible. Sarah felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with the coffee. Cole Brennan was unlike any man she had met before, principled without being preachy, strong without being violent, kind without expecting anything in return. She found herself noticing things about him she had not let herself see before, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the capable strength of his hands, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words actually mattered. You are a good man, Cole Brennan, she said quietly. He looked almost embarrassed, a slight color rising in his tan cheeks. I am just doing what my father would have done, what any decent person should do. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Sarah tended her sheep and continued improving the cabin, transforming it into a real home. Cole and his men worked their cattle and prepared for the autumn roundup. And every evening, after the day's work was done, Cole found reasons to stop by Sarah's cabin, to check on a repair, to bring her something from town, or simply to talk. They talked about everything. Sarah told him about growing up in Ohio, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about following her father west with a mixture of excitement and terror. Cole shared stories about building the ranch with his father, about learning to read the land and the animals, about the loneliness of running a place by himself after his father's death. I always thought I would have a family by now, he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch of Sarah's cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. But finding the right woman out here is not easy. The few single women in the territory are either looking for wealthy husbands or they are already spoken for. And what makes a woman right? Sarah asked, her heart beating a little faster. Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking. Someone who understands this life, I guess. Someone who is not afraid of hard work, who can be a partner instead of just a decoration. Someone who sees the beauty in this land instead of just the hardship. He glanced at her. Someone like you, actually. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Sarah felt her breath catch, torn between hope and caution. Cole, But before she could finish, the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the sheep pasture. Both of them were on their feet instantly, running toward the sound. In the gathering dusk, Sarah could see figures moving among her flock, and the sheep were scattering in panic. Her dogs were barking frantically, trying desperately to maintain order. "Stay here," Cole commanded, but Sarah ignored him, running after him toward the pasture. As they got closer, she could see 3 riders deliberately driving the sheep apart, firing their guns into the air to create maximum panic. Cole drew his pistol and fired a shot over the riders' heads. "Get away from those sheep!" The riders turned, and Sarah recognized 2 of them from Cutter's previous visit. They fired back, and Cole tackled Sarah to the ground as a bullet whined overhead. From the direction of the barn, Sarah heard Hank and Pete shouting, and more gunfire erupted. The riders, realizing they were now facing armed opposition, wheeled their horses and fled into the darkness. Cole helped Sarah to her feet, his hands checking her quickly for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine." Sarah was already moving toward her scattered flock, whistling for her dogs. "But the sheep, we have to get them back together before they run too far." They worked for hours in the darkness, Cole and his men helping Sarah and her dogs gather the frightened sheep. By the time they had accounted for all of them, the moon was high overhead, and everyone was exhausted. 3 sheep had been shot, casualties of the night's violence, and Sarah felt tears of rage and frustration burning her eyes as she looked at their bodies. "This is my fault," she said, her voice breaking. "My father raised these animals from lambs, and now they are dead because of me." Cole put a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and grounding. "This is Thornton's fault, not yours. He is the one choosing violence over decency. But he is doing it because of me, because I would not leave. He is doing it because he is a bully and a coward who cannot stand anyone defying him." Cole turned her gently to face him. "Sarah, you have every right to be here, to make a life for yourself and your animals. Do not let him make you believe otherwise." In the moonlight, with the smell of gunpowder still in the air and the sound of her frightened sheep all around them, Sarah looked up at Cole and felt something shift inside her. This man had risked his life for her, had stood between her and danger without hesitation. And more than that, he believed in her right to exist in this harsh land, to pursue her father's dream, to be more than what men like Thornton would allow. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Cole's hand moved from her shoulder to her cheek, a gentle touch that made her heart race. "Sarah, I need you to know something. When I offered to help you, it was because it was the right thing to do. But somewhere along the way, my reasons changed. I do not want you to leave when the drought ends. I want you to stay, not just on my land, but in my life." "Cole, Sarah found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes searching his face. "I feel the same way. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was just gratitude, but it is more than that. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way I have never experienced before." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and kissed her softly. The kiss was gentle and tentative, a question more than a demand, and Sarah answered it by reaching up to wrap her arms around his neck and kiss him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but out here, life moves at its own pace, and when something is right, you know it." "I do know it," Sarah agreed. "But Cole, we have to be realistic. Thornton is not going to stop. Tonight was just the beginning. He will escalate until he forces you to give in or ruins you trying. Then we need to be smarter than him." Cole straightened, his expression turning thoughtful. Tomorrow, I am going to ride into town and have a conversation with some people. There are more ranchers around here who are tired of Thornton's tactics than he realizes. If we stand together, he cannot touch us." The next morning, Cole departed for Billings, the nearest town of any size, leaving Hank and Pete to guard the ranch and Sarah to tend her flock. Sarah spent the day on edge, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of trouble, but nothing happened. The heat continued unabated, and the sheep grazed peacefully, seemingly unaware of how close they had come to disaster the night before. When Cole returned late that afternoon, he looked satisfied. "I talked to 6 other ranchers, all men with spreads smaller than Thornton's but respectable operations. All of them have grievances against Thornton: water rights disputes, intimidation, unfair market practices. They have agreed to stand with us. We are meeting tomorrow at the church to formalize our position." "Will that really make a difference?" Sarah asked, wanting to hope but afraid to. "It will if we stick together. Thornton's power comes from dividing people, making them think they are alone against him. Once people realize they have allies, everything changes." Cole took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Trust me on this." The meeting at the small, whitewashed church on the edge of Billings was tense but productive. Sarah accompanied Cole, the only woman in a room full of weathered ranchers and farmers. Some of them looked skeptical when they saw her, but Cole introduced her matter-of-factly as the woman whose cause had brought them together. The men shared their stories of Thornton's abuses: creeks diverted without permission, cattle deliberately driven across planted fields, intimidation and violence against anyone who protested. Gradually, a consensus emerged. They would form an association of small ranchers and farmers, pooling their resources and supporting each other against Thornton's predations. "We need to understand what we are risking," said a grizzled rancher named Silas Crow. "Thornton has money and men. He can make life very difficult for all of us." "He already is making life difficult," another man pointed out. "At least this way we have a fighting chance." The vote was unanimous. They elected Silas as their president and Cole as vice president, responsible for organizing mutual defense and communication. Each man pledged to come to the aid of any other member who faced intimidation or violence from Thornton's men. As they left the church, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. "Do you really think this will work?" "It has to," Cole replied, "because the alternative is letting men like Thornton turn this territory into their personal kingdom, and I did not come west to bow to kings." But Thornton was not finished. 2 days later, a fire broke out in Cole's barn in the middle of the night. Only quick action by Pete, who had been sleeping in the bunkhouse and smelled the smoke, prevented it from spreading to the other buildings. They managed to save most of the structure, but a winter's worth of hay went up in flames, and 2 of Cole's horses suffered burns. Cole stood in the dawn light, looking at the charred timbers, his expression grim. This was deliberate. The fire started in 3 different places. "He is trying to break you financially," Sarah said, her stomach churning with guilt. "Buying replacement hay in a drought year will cost a fortune." "Then we will manage without." Cole turned to her, his jaw set with determination. "I am not backing down, Sarah. Not now, not ever." Word of the fire spread quickly, and by noon, members of their new association started arriving. They brought hay from their own stores, lumber for repairs, and their labor. By evening, the barn was partially rebuilt, and Cole had enough hay stored away to last through the winter if he was careful. Silas Crow pulled Cole aside before departing. "Thornton made a mistake with that fire. He showed everyone that you were telling the truth about him. Every man here knows what arson means, and they know Thornton's the only one with motive. You have got more support now than you did yesterday." But the attacks continued. Fences were cut, allowing Cole's cattle to wander. A section of the creek was dammed upstream, reducing the water flow to Cole's property. Sarah's sheep were harassed twice more by night riders, though each time Hank and Pete drove them off before serious damage was done. Through it all, Cole and Sarah grew closer. In the evenings, after the work was done and the watch set, they would sit together and talk, or simply enjoy each other's company in comfortable silence. Cole taught her to read the stars, pointing out constellations and using them to navigate. Sarah shared her knowledge of sheep, explaining the subtle signs of illness or distress that most people would miss. "You know," Cole said one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset, "my father used to say that the true measure of a person comes out in hard times. Anyone can be decent when life is easy." "And what do you think about me?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. I think you are the strongest woman I have ever met. You lost your father, you faced threats and violence, and you never once considered giving up on what matters to you. I think any man would be lucky to have you in his life." He paused, then added quietly, "I know I feel lucky every single day." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, born of emotion too big to contain. "I love you, Cole Brennan. I did not plan to, and I fought against it for a while because I was afraid. But I love you, and I cannot pretend otherwise anymore." Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. "I love you too, Sarah Mitchell. I think I started falling for you that first night when you stood there by your campfire, scared but defiant, refusing to give in to intimidation. I want to marry you, if you will have me. I want us to build a life together, raise sheep and cattle and children on this land." "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where the Ranchers Association had held its first meeting. Sarah wore a simple dress of pale blue cotton that she had sewn herself, and Cole borrowed a proper suit from Silas Crow. The church was packed with their supporters, ranchers and their families, townspeople who were tired of Thornton's dominance. Even the Presbyterian minister, who had been pressured by Thornton to refuse them, but had stood firm. Thornton himself did not attend, but his presence loomed over the proceedings like a thundercloud. Everyone knew the marriage represented more than just two people joining their lives. It was a symbol of resistance, proof that Thornton could not control everything and everyone in the territory. The reception afterward was held at Cole's ranch, with tables set up outside and food brought by every family in attendance. There was music and dancing and laughter, and for a few hours everyone forgot about the troubles that surrounded them. As Sarah danced with her new husband under the stars, she felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," she admitted. "It feels too good to last." "Then stop waiting for disaster and just enjoy the moment," Cole advised, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh. "We will face whatever comes together. That is what marriage means." But disaster was indeed coming, and it arrived with the force of a summer storm. 3 days after the wedding, Thornton made his most aggressive move yet. He filed a legal challenge to Cole's water rights, claiming that the creek running through Cole's property actually originated on Thornton's land and therefore belonged to him. The territorial court, presided over by a judge who owed Thornton numerous favors, ruled in Thornton's favor without even holding a proper hearing. "This is insane," Sarah said, reading the legal notice that had been delivered by a territorial marshal. "That creek has run through your property for decades. Your father's deed specifically mentions the water rights." "Thornton does not care about legal niceties," Cole replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He is trying to force us out by cutting off our water supply. Without that creek, we cannot sustain the cattle or your sheep, especially in this drought." They called an emergency meeting of the Ranchers Association. The mood was grim as they discussed their options. A lawyer from Billings explained that appealing the judge's decision would take months and cost more money than any of them could afford. In the meantime, Thornton could legally divert the creek, and there would be nothing they could do to stop him. "There has to be something," Sarah insisted, "some way to fight back." "There is," said a quiet voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see a tall, thin man with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Publicity. What Thornton fears most is attention from outside the territory. If this story reaches the newspapers in Denver or Chicago, if people back east start asking questions about land grabbing and corruption in Montana, the territorial governor will have to act. The man introduced himself as Marcus Webb, a journalist who had recently arrived in Billings to document life on the frontier. He had already been investigating Thornton's business practices and had sources who could corroborate the pattern of intimidation and illegal activity. "You can really get this story published?" Cole asked. "I can try. I have connections with several major newspapers, but I will need documentation, witnesses willing to go on record, evidence of Thornton's wrongdoing." Marcus looked around the room. "It would mean putting yourselves out there, risking even more retaliation." The men exchanged glances, and Sarah could see the fear warring with determination on their faces. These were decent people who just wanted to make an honest living, not martyrs looking for a fight. But they also understood that sometimes standing up for what was right required taking risks. Silas Crow stood up. "I will go on record. Thornton diverted a creek on my property 2 years ago, killed half my herd during a drought. I can prove it." One by one, others stood and shared their stories. Marcus Webb took notes furiously, asking questions and gathering details. By the end of the meeting, he had enough material for a dozen articles. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus conducted interviews and gathered documentation, while Thornton began construction on a dam that would divert the creek away from Cole's property. Cole and Sarah watched helplessly as their water supply dwindled to a trickle. They hauled water from a spring 2 miles away, barely enough to sustain the animals, but everyone knew it was a temporary solution at best. The situation grew desperate. Sarah's sheep began showing signs of stress from the heat and inadequate water. Cole's cattle were equally affected, losing weight and becoming lethargic. At night, Sarah lay in bed beside her husband, listening to him breathe and trying not to let fear overwhelm her. "Maybe we should just leave," she whispered one night. "Find land somewhere else, start over." Cole pulled her closer. "And what about everyone else? If we leave, we are abandoning them to face Thornton alone. That association we formed, those friendships we built, they will all fall apart. Is that the legacy you want?" "No," Sarah admitted. "But I do not want to lose everything either. I do not want to lose you. You will not lose me. I promise you that." He kissed her forehead. "Marcus says his first article will be published in the Denver paper next week. Once that happens, everything changes." The article appeared on a Tuesday morning. Marcus brought copies from town, and they gathered in Cole's kitchen to read it. The headline was bold and damning. "Montana Cattle Baron Seizes Water Rights, Ruins Small Ranchers." The article laid out Thornton's pattern of abuse in meticulous detail, naming names and providing evidence. It painted a picture of a man drunk on power, using his wealth and influence to crush anyone who dared challenge his authority. "This is good," Silas said, reading over Cole's shoulder. "This is really good. But will it make a difference?" They got their answer 3 days later when a representative from the territorial governor's office arrived in Billings to investigate the allegations. The representative, a serious man named Harrison, who seemed genuinely appalled by what he found, conducted interviews and reviewed documents. He also ordered Thornton to cease construction on the dam pending a complete review of the water rights situation. Thornton, for the first time, looked rattled. He tried to use his political connections to have Harrison recalled, but the publicity had made that impossible. The governor, facing pressure from voters and newspapers across the country, could not be seen protecting a land grabber and bully. The review took 3 weeks, during which time Cole and Sarah lived in a state of anxious suspension. The creek still flowed at a reduced rate thanks to Thornton's partial dam, but it was enough to keep the animals alive. More articles appeared in various newspapers, each one adding to the pressure on Thornton and the territorial government. Finally, Harrison delivered his verdict at a public meeting in Billings. The church was packed with people eager to hear the outcome. Sarah sat beside Cole, her hand gripped tightly in his, barely breathing as Harrison read from his report. After a thorough investigation, this office finds that the water rights claimed by James Thornton regarding the creek in question are without merit. The original survey clearly shows the creek's source is on public land, and the rights to its use were properly deeded to the Brennan family in 1867. The ruling by Judge Morrison is hereby overturned, and Mr. Thornton is ordered to dismantle the dam and restore the creek to its natural flow within 30 days. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as Cole pulled her into a fierce embrace. They had won. Against all odds, they had actually won. But Harrison was not finished. Furthermore, this investigation has uncovered evidence of numerous other questionable land and water claims by Mr. Thornton. The territorial governor has ordered a complete audit of all Thornton holdings and business practices. Any properties or rights found to have been obtained through fraud or intimidation will be returned to their rightful owners. The cheering grew even louder. Sarah looked across the room and saw Thornton standing near the back, his face purple with rage. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something that looked almost like grudging respect beneath the anger. He had underestimated her and Cole, had assumed their determination would crumble under pressure. He had been wrong. As people crowded around to offer congratulations, Marcus Webb made his way to Sarah and Cole. "I wanted you both to know that the story has been picked up by newspapers all over the country. You have become symbols of the fight against corporate greed and corruption. I have had letters from homesteaders in Kansas, farmers in Iowa, miners in Colorado, all saying your story gives them hope. "We did not set out to be symbols," Cole said, though he looked pleased. "We just wanted to keep our land and our way of life." "Sometimes that is how the most important battles are fought," Marcus replied, "by ordinary people who refuse to give up." The following months brought dramatic changes to the territory. The audit of Thornton's holdings revealed fraudulent claims on over 50,000 acres of land and numerous water sources. Many of these were restored to public use or returned to the small ranchers who had been forced off them. Thornton, facing potential criminal charges, quietly sold his remaining holdings and left Montana for California. With Thornton gone, a new atmosphere emerged in the territory. The Ranchers Association that Cole and Sarah had helped form grew stronger, adding new members and expanding its mission to include cooperative marketing and mutual insurance. The organization became a model for similar groups across the West. For Sarah and Cole, life settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. Sarah's sheep flock grew and thrived, producing wool of such high quality that she began receiving premium prices from buyers in the East. Cole's cattle operation expanded modestly, and he began experimenting with breeding programs that improved his herd's resilience to drought and harsh winters. The drought finally broke in October with a series of gentle rains that turned the brown hills green again. Sarah stood on the porch of their cabin, now expanded and improved into a proper house, and watched the rain fall with a sense of deep contentment. Jack and Lady slept on the porch beside her, gray now around their muzzles but still alert and capable. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Sarah replied. "How different life is now compared to a year ago. How much has changed." "Are you happy?" She turned in his arms to face him. "More than I ever thought possible. I have work I love, a home, a partner who respects and supports me. I have friends and community and purpose. What more could anyone want?" "How about a family?" Cole asked, his eyes searching hers. "We have talked about children, but we have been so busy fighting battles and building our lives. Maybe it is time to think about the next chapter." Sarah smiled, a secret she had been holding for 2 weeks bubbling up. "Actually, I think that chapter has already begun. I am fairly certain I am pregnant, Cole. I wanted to be sure before I told you, but all the signs are there." The expression on Cole's face was worth waiting for. Shock melting into joy, melting into something like awe. "Really? Sarah, are you serious?" "As serious as I have ever been about anything." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, his hands moved to her still flat stomach with gentle reverence. A baby. Our baby. The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the winter brought complications that kept her confined to bed for weeks. But Cole was attentive and patient, taking over her sheep duties and making sure she followed the doctor's orders. The women from the Ranchers Association came by regularly to help with cooking and cleaning, forming a support network that Sarah had never experienced before. Their daughter was born in April of 1885, a tiny red-faced creature with a surprisingly loud cry. They named her Catherine, after Sarah's mother, and watching Cole hold his daughter for the first time, seeing the tender wonder on his face, Sarah fell in love with him all over again. "She is perfect," Cole whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "Look at her, Sarah. She is absolutely perfect." Motherhood transformed Sarah in ways she had not anticipated. She still worked with the sheep, though she reduced her hours and hired a young man named Tommy to help with the day-to-day tasks. But she found a fierce new determination to build a world where Catherine could grow up safe and free to pursue whatever dreams she might develop. When Catherine was 6 months old, Sarah attended a meeting of the Ranchers Association with the baby on her hip. Some of the older men looked skeptical at first, but Sarah had earned their respect through her determination and savvy. She proposed expanding the association's mission to include education, suggesting they pool resources to hire a teacher and establish a school. "Our children deserve better than what we had," she argued passionately. "They should be able to read and write and calculate beyond basic arithmetic. They should learn history and geography and science. If we want them to compete in a changing world, we need to invest in their education." The proposal passed, and by the following autumn, the first association school opened with 12 students and a young teacher from Ohio who was eager for adventure. Catherine was too young to attend, but Sarah took satisfaction in knowing that when her daughter was ready, there would be opportunities available. Life continued its steady progression through seasons and years. Catherine grew into a bright, curious child who loved the sheep and the dogs and following her father around the ranch. When she was 3, Sarah gave birth to a son they named James, after Cole's father. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they called Daniel. The ranch prospered. Sarah's wool business expanded to the point where she was shipping product to manufactories in New York and Boston. Cole's cattle operation grew more sophisticated, and he began hosting workshops for other ranchers on breeding and range management techniques. Together, they purchased additional land, expanding their holdings to 3,000 deeded acres. But it was not just about accumulation of wealth or property. Sarah and Cole remained committed to the community they had helped build. They donated land for the school and helped fund its expansion. When a family lost everything to a barn fire, they organized relief efforts. When a young widow struggled to maintain her homestead after her husband's death, they provided support and advice until she found her footing. Catherine grew into a remarkable young woman, intelligent and independent like her mother, principled and strong like her father. She excelled at school and showed a talent for mathematics that surprised everyone. When she was 16, Sarah and Cole made the difficult decision to send her to a girls' academy in Denver, knowing she needed opportunities beyond what the territory could provide. "I do not want to leave the ranch," Catherine protested, though Sarah could see the excitement beneath her reluctance. "This is my home." "And it always will be," Sarah assured her. "But you have talents that deserve to be developed, dreams that deserve to be pursued. Your father and I will be here when you come back, and the ranch will be here too. But you need to see more of the world, learn everything you can, and then decide what kind of life you want to build." Catherine thrived in Denver, writing long letters home about her studies and the fascinating people she was meeting. She returned each summer to help with the ranch work, but Sarah could see her daughter's horizons expanding in ways that both thrilled and saddened her. This was what they had fought for, the freedom for their children to choose their own paths. But watching Catherine grow beyond the boundaries of the ranch was bittersweet. James and Daniel were different from their sister, more content with ranch life, and less interested in academic pursuits. James showed a natural talent with animals, able to sense illness or distress before anyone else could see the signs. Daniel loved the mechanical aspects of ranching, constantly tinkering with equipment and finding ways to improve efficiency. By the time Sarah was 40, she and Cole had built something remarkable, not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of community and cooperation that had transformed the entire territory. The Ranchers Association had grown to include over 100 families, and similar organizations had sprung up across Montana and neighboring territories. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained for over 15 years, Cole took Sarah's hand. "Do you ever think about that first day we met, when I rode up to your camp and offered you grazing land?" "I think about it all the time," Sarah admitted. "I was so scared, so alone, and then you appeared like something out of a story, offering me exactly what I needed most." "I did not know then that I was falling in love with you," Cole said. "I thought I was just doing the right thing, but looking back, I think some part of me recognized you immediately as the person I had been waiting for all my life." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. "We have built a good life together, Cole Brennan. Not an easy life, but a good one." "The best life," he agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have got years ahead of us, more sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to spoil when Catherine and the boys find partners of their own." Catherine did eventually find a partner, though not in the way anyone expected. She met him at the academy in Denver, a young man named Robert Chen, whose family had immigrated from China and established a successful import business. The relationship caused some controversy, both because of Robert's ethnicity and because he was not a rancher or farmer. But Sarah and Cole welcomed him warmly, recognizing in him the same qualities they valued most: integrity, intelligence, and a genuine love for their daughter. "He makes her happy," Sarah told her friends who expressed concerns. "He respects her mind and supports her ambitions. What more could we want for our child?" The wedding was held at the ranch, a fusion of traditions that reflected both families' heritages. Catherine wore a white dress, but also incorporated elements of Chinese wedding attire at Robert's mother's suggestion. The ceremony was conducted by the Presbyterian minister who had married Sarah and Cole, but it included readings in both English and Mandarin. It was a day of joy and celebration, and also a day that marked the culmination of everything Sarah and Cole had fought for, a world where their daughter could choose her own path, marry for love, regardless of convention, and build a life that honored both her roots and her aspirations. Catherine and Robert settled in Denver, where Robert joined his family's business, and Catherine used her mathematical talents to help modernize their accounting practices. They had 3 children over the years, and each summer they brought the grandchildren to the ranch for extended visits, letting them experience the land and lifestyle that had shaped their mother. James married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they took over day-to-day management of the cattle operation. Daniel, true to his mechanical interests, moved to Billings and opened a shop that sold and repaired agricultural equipment. He remained closely connected to the ranch, always available when his expertise was needed. The years accumulated like snowfall, each one adding another layer to the life Sarah and Cole had built. They grew older, their hair turning gray and then white, their movements becoming slower and more careful. But their love remained constant, deepening and maturing with each passing season. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 generations filled the house and spilled out onto the lawn, children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren running and playing in the space where Sarah's sheep had once grazed. As Sarah watched the chaos and joy of her extended family, she felt Cole's hand slip into hers. They did not need words after 30 years together. She knew he was feeling the same mixture of gratitude and wonder that filled her heart. That evening, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, they returned to their favorite spot on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any artificial light, and the creek that had caused so much conflict decades ago burbled peacefully in the background. "No regrets?" Cole asked, the question that had become a ritual between them. "Not a single one," Sarah replied, the answer that never changed. "Everything we went through, every battle we fought, every sacrifice we made, it was all worth it to build this life, this family, this legacy." Cole raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Sarah Brennan. I loved you the moment I saw you standing by that campfire, refusing to back down. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Sarah whispered, "my hero, my partner, my home." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the sounds of the Montana night. The ranch that had witnessed their struggles and triumphs surrounded them, solid and enduring, a testament to what could be built when people chose courage over fear, love over convenience, principle over profit. In the distance, they could hear the bleating of sheep. Sarah still maintained a small flock for sentimental reasons, though the wool business had been turned over to younger hands. The sound brought back memories of those desperate early days when everything hung in the balance and the future seemed impossibly uncertain. But they had prevailed, not through violence or wealth or privilege, but through determination and community, and the fundamental belief that everyone deserved the chance to build a life on their own terms. That belief had sustained them through drought and fires and intimidation. It had carried them through the everyday challenges of raising children and running a ranch. And it had created ripples that spread far beyond their own property lines, inspiring others to stand up for themselves and each other. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, Cole helped Sarah to her feet, and they went inside together, their footsteps synchronized from decades of walking side by side. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities. That was the nature of ranch life. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything, with love and determination and an unshakable faith in each other. The story that had begun with a desperate sheep herder and a principled cowboy had become something far larger than either of them had imagined. It had become a story about community and justice, about standing up for what was right, even when the cost was high. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been, a love story, pure and true and enduring. Years continued to pass in their gentle, inexorable way. Sarah and Cole grew into their 70s, still sharp of mind though their bodies grew frailer. They no longer worked the ranch directly, but they remained involved, offering advice and wisdom accumulated over decades of experience. The family business had expanded beyond anything they had dreamed. The sheep operation, the cattle ranch, Daniel's equipment business, and Catherine's consulting work all thrived and supported multiple generations. The territory that had seemed so wild and lawless when Sarah first arrived had transformed into the state of Montana, complete with proper government and legal systems that, while not perfect, were far better than the corruption that had reigned under Thornton's influence. The Ranchers Association had evolved into a cooperative that provided services ranging from insurance to marketing to advocacy in the state legislature. Sarah often thought about how different her life might have been if Cole had not ridden up to her camp that evening so many years ago. She might have been driven off, her sheep scattered or killed, her father's legacy destroyed. She might have given up and returned east, accepting some conventional life that would have slowly suffocated her spirit. Instead, she had found not just land and water for her flock, but a partner who believed in her right to exist as a full human being, capable and strong and worthy of respect. On a crisp autumn morning, when Sarah was 76 and Cole 79, they took a walk together along the creek, moving slowly but steadily. The cottonwoods had turned gold, and their leaves rustled in the breeze like whispered conversations. They held hands as they walked, their fingers intertwined with the comfortable familiarity of a lifetime together. "Do you remember," Sarah said, "that first kiss after the night riders attacked my sheep?" Cole smiled, the expression lighting up his weathered face. "I remember being terrified you would pull away, that I had misread everything between us." "I was terrified too," Sarah admitted, "but also absolutely certain. Sometimes the most frightening thing and the most right thing are the same thing." They reached their favorite spot, a bend in the creek where the water pooled deep and clear beneath an ancient cottonwood. This was where they had made so many important decisions over the years, where they had celebrated victories and mourned losses, where they had simply sat together and let the peace of the land soak into their bones. "I have been thinking," Cole said as they settled carefully onto the bench he had built here 20 years ago, "about what happens next, not tomorrow or next year, but eventually, when we are gone." Sarah had been thinking about it too, though she was not eager to discuss it. "The children will continue what we started. The ranch will endure. I know that, but I want to make sure our story endures too. Not because we were important, but because what we stood for was important. The idea that ordinary people can make a difference, that standing up for what is right matters even when it is hard, that love and community and courage can overcome greed and intimidation." "You want to write it down?" Sarah asked, understanding. "I want someone to write it down. Maybe Marcus Webb, if he's still around and interested. Or Catherine. She inherited your gift for words. I just want to make sure that future generations understand how things came to be the way they are, what it cost, and who paid the price." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then we will do that. We will make sure the story is preserved, not for our glory, but so others might be inspired to find their own courage when they need it." They sat quietly for a while, watching the water flow past, constant and timeless. Sarah felt the weight of years pressing on her, but also a profound sense of completion. They had done what they set out to do, and more. They had built a life worth living, and a legacy worth leaving. Cole passed peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, his hand still holding Sarah's, just as it had for over 50 years. The funeral drew people from across Montana and beyond, men and women whose lives had been touched by Cole's integrity and kindness, whose own stories of success could be traced back to the stand he had taken against Thornton all those years ago. Sarah grieved deeply but without bitterness. They had been given so much time together, so many years of partnership and love. She knew she was fortunate beyond measure, and she refused to let sorrow erase gratitude. She lived for 3 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, tending a small garden, and writing down the stories Cole had wanted preserved. Catherine helped her organize the material, and together they created a detailed account of those early struggles and the community that had emerged from them. On a summer evening, very much like the one when she had first met Cole, Sarah sat on her porch and watched the sun set over the Montana hills. Her grandson James, named for Cole's father, carried forward through the generations, sat beside her, asking questions about the old days and listening with rapt attention to her stories. "Were you scared, Grandma?" he asked, "when you were all alone and the bad man wanted to take your sheep?" "I was terrified," Sarah told him honestly. "But fear is not the same as cowardice. Being brave does not mean you are not afraid. It means you do what is right even though you are afraid." "And Grandpa helped you," the boy said, his young face serious. "He was brave too." "He was the bravest man I ever knew," Sarah agreed. Not because he fought or threatened anyone, but because he stood up for what he believed in, even when it would have been easier to look away. That is the kind of person I hope you will grow up to be. The boy nodded solemnly, and Sarah could see the promise in him, the next link in a chain of integrity and courage that she and Cole had forged together. That night, Sarah went to bed feeling peaceful and complete. She knew her time was near. She could feel it in her bones, in the growing weight of each breath. But she was not afraid. She had lived fully and loved deeply. She had fought the good fight and built something lasting. And soon, she would be reunited with Cole, her partner, and love in whatever came next. She passed quietly in the night, her last breath a gentle sigh of completion. Her children found her in the morning, lying peacefully in the bed she had shared with Cole, a slight smile on her face, as if she was greeting an old friend. The family buried her beside Cole on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they had fought so hard to protect. The headstones were simple, inscribed with just their names and dates, but the true monument was all around them: the thriving ranch, the strong community, the generations of children growing up with opportunities and freedoms that Sarah and Cole had fought to ensure. At the funeral, Catherine stood before the assembled crowd and shared the story her mother had written, the account of a desperate sheep herder and a principled cowboy who had dared to defy a tyrant. She spoke of courage and community, of love that sustained through hardship, of the ordinary people who shaped history through their refusal to accept injustice. "My parents were not saints," Catherine said, her voice strong despite her grief. "They were just two people who believed that everyone deserves a chance to build a good life, and who were willing to stand up for that belief even when it cost them dearly. They showed us that love is not just a feeling, but an action, a daily choice to support and believe in each other. They taught us that community is not just living near each other, but standing with each other when times are hard. And they demonstrated that legacy is not about wealth or fame, but about the values we pass down and the world we leave behind." She looked out over the crowd. 4 generations of family, friends old and new, people whose lives had been touched directly or indirectly by Sarah and Cole's story. They would want us to remember that their story did not end with their deaths. It continues in every one of us who chooses courage over fear, community over isolation, love over indifference. That is the legacy they built, and it is up to us to carry it forward. As the years continued to roll past, the story of Sarah and Cole became legend in Montana, told and retold with each generation, adding its own understanding and interpretation. The ranch remained in the family, adapted and modernized, but still fundamentally the place that Sarah and Cole had built together. The creek that had been the source of so much conflict flowed on, watering sheep and cattle and gardens, sustaining life just as it always had. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set in brilliant colors over the Montana hills, visitors to the ranch would sometimes pause and imagine they could feel the presence of 2 people who had loved each other deeply and built something lasting from the love. The sheep herder who refused to give up, and the cowboy who dared anyone to make her, united in life and death by a bond that transcended time and circumstance. Their story had begun with conflict and courage, with a desperate need and an unexpected offer of help, but it had transformed into something far greater, a testament to the power of love and principle, proof that ordinary people could shape history, evidence that standing up for what is right, even at great personal cost, creates ripples that spread far beyond what anyone can imagine. The land remembered them. The community they helped build honored them. And the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren they left behind carried forward their values and vision, ensuring that the legacy of Sarah Mitchell Brennan and Cole Brennan would endure for generations yet to come, a reminder that love and courage can indeed change the world.